One family, $900 billion, and a grip on Latin America so tight, you've paid them without even knowing it. Right now, as you watch this video, there's a 78% chance you're connected through their network. If you've ever visited Mexico, you've walked through their stores, eaten at their restaurants, shopped at their malls. They own the towers. They own the cables. They own the roads you drive on and the banks that hold your money. And yet, most people have never heard their name. Meet Carlos Slim Helú. For 4 consecutive years, he was the richest man on planet Earth, surpassing Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. But unlike the flashy billionaires you know, Slim doesn't own yachts. He doesn't fly private jets everywhere. He drives himself to work. He lives in the same modest house he's occupied for 40 years. And that's exactly what makes him dangerous. Because while you weren't paying attention, he quietly built the most powerful empire in Latin American history. The Slim family controls over 200 companies spanning 17 countries. Telecommunications, banking, construction, retail, real estate, mining, oil, manufacturing, insurance, media. If it makes money in Latin America, the Slims probably own a piece of it. In Mexico alone, the family's companies represent 6% of the entire national economy. That's one family controlling more wealth than the GDP of most countries. But here's what nobody talks about. How did a Lebanese immigrant son become more powerful than governments? What strategies did he use that every other billionaire missed? And most importantly, what happened when he tried to expand into the United States and got blocked by the one force even he couldn't control? This story begins in 1882, not in Mexico, but in a small Lebanese village. That's when Carlos Slim Helú made a decision that would change the course of Latin American history. He left Lebanon and sailed to Mexico with nothing but 30 pesos in his pocket. He changed his name to Julian Slim Helú to sound more Spanish. And he opened a small dry goods store called La Estrella de Orient, the Star of the Orient. But here's what's fascinating. Julian didn't just work hard. He understood something about Mexico that even Mexicans didn't fully grasp at the time. The country was about to explode. When the Mexican Revolution erupted in 1910, most wealthy families fled the country in panic. Properties were abandoned, businesses collapsed, fortunes disappeared overnight. But Julian Slim saw opportunity where others saw chaos. While everyone was selling in fear, he was buying at rock-bottom prices. Real estate, businesses, anything valuable. By the time the revolution ended, he had accumulated properties and businesses worth millions. And he taught his son Carlos a lesson that would become the foundation of a $900 billion empire. When there's blood in the streets, buy. Carlos Slim never forgot that lesson, and he would use it to perfection decades later. Carlos Slim Helú was born in 1940 in Mexico City. By age 11, he had already opened his first bank account and bought shares in a Mexican bank. At 12, he was reading financial statements and tracking his investments in a notebook. At 15, he became a shareholder of Banco Nacional de Mexico. Most teenagers were playing sports. Carlos was building wealth. He studied civil engineering at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, but his real education was happening at the dinner table. His father had died when Carlos was 13, but not before teaching him the principles that would guide his entire career. Invest in times of crisis. Maintain austerity. Never take on excessive debt. Think in decades, not quarters. And most importantly, once you enter a business, dominate it completely. In 1965, at just 25 years old, Carlos started his own stock brokerage firm. His timing was perfect. Mexico's economy was booming and the stock market was soaring. But Slim wasn't interested in just playing the market. He was interested in owning it. Over the next 15 years, he quietly accumulated positions in construction companies, mining firms, retail businesses, and restaurant chains. By 1980, he had built Grupo Gales, a conglomerate worth millions. But it was still nothing compared to what was coming. Because in 1982, Mexico faced the worst economic crisis in its modern history, and Carlos Slim was ready. August 1982. The Mexican government announced it could no longer pay its foreign debt. The peso collapsed. The stock market crashed. Businesses went bankrupt by the thousands. Foreign investors fled. It was an economic apocalypse. Every rich person in Mexico was trying to get their money out of the country, except one. While billionaires were panic selling everything they owned, Carlos Slim was buying. Companies that had been worth millions were selling for pennies on the dollar. And Slim bought them all. Sanborn's, a restaurant and retail chain. Reynolds Aluminio, a cigarette company. Mining operations. Real estate. By the time the crisis ended, Carlos Slim had increased his net worth by 400% while everyone else had lost fortunes. But this was just the warm-up. The real game was about to begin. 1988. Carlos Salinas de Gortari became president of Mexico with a radical plan: privatize the government-owned industries. Telephones, airlines, banks, steel mills, everything was going up for sale. The crown jewel, Telmex Telefonos de Mexico, the national telephone monopoly. Telmex was a disaster. It took years to get a phone line installed. Service was terrible. The company was losing money. But Carlos Slim didn't see a broken phone company. He saw the future of communication, and he wanted it all. In 1990, Carlos Slim put together a consortium with SBC Communications and France Télécom. Together, they bought Telmex for $1.7 billion. Slim's personal stake, $446 million. It seemed like an enormous gamble, but the deal came with something extraordinary: a 6-year monopoly guarantee. The government promised that Telmex would be the only phone company allowed to operate in Mexico until 1996. No competition. Total control. And here's the genius move nobody talks about. Slim negotiated the terms so that even after 1996, any competitor would have to pay interconnection fees to Telmex. That meant even when competition finally arrived, Slim would still get paid. It was the perfect trap, and Mexico walked right into it. Within 5 years, Slim transformed Telmex from a government bureaucracy into a world-class telecommunications company. He invested billions in infrastructure, installed millions of new phone lines, expanded into mobile phones through Telcel. By 1996, when the monopoly officially ended, Telmex controlled 90% of Mexico's landlines and 80% of mobile phone subscriptions. Competitors couldn't touch him, and the money started flowing like a river. By 2000, Carlos Slim's net worth had grown from $1 billion to $8 billion, but he was just getting started. 2000. While American telecom companies were collapsing after the dot-com bubble, Carlos Slim launched América Móvil and began his conquest of Latin America. One by one, he bought telecom companies across the continent: Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador. His strategy was simple but brutal: enter a market through acquisition, cut costs dramatically, underprice competitors until they collapse or sell, then dominate. By 2007, América Móvil had 240 million wireless subscribers across 18 countries. It was the largest mobile network operator in the Americas, larger than AT&T in its region, larger than Verizon, and Carlos Slim personally owned over 60% of it. 2010. Forbes magazine crowned Carlos Slim Helú the richest person on earth. His net worth, $53.5 billion. He had surpassed Bill Gates. He had beaten Warren Buffett. A Mexican engineer whose father was a Lebanese immigrant had become the wealthiest human being on the planet. And he did it by controlling one thing: communication. In Mexico, 70% of cell phone users were his customers. 80% of landlines connected through his networks. Want to call someone in Mexico? You're paying Slim. Want to use the internet? Paying Slim. Want to watch television? That's right, paying Slim. He had achieved what every monopolist dreams of: unavoidability. But success this big creates enemies, and Carlos Slim's empire was about to face its greatest challenge. The Mexican people started asking uncomfortable questions. Why were phone rates so high when the service was so poor? Why did it cost more to make a phone call in Mexico than almost anywhere else in the developed world? Economists estimated that Slim's monopoly was costing the Mexican economy billions annually in lost productivity and higher prices. The OECD published reports. Consumer groups protested. Regulators started investigating. And the criticism reached a crescendo. Was Carlos Slim helping Mexico, or was he holding it hostage? The Mexican government finally acted. In 2013, they passed a massive telecommunications reform designed specifically to break Slim's monopoly. They declared América Móvil a preponderant economic agent, essentially calling it too powerful, and forced it to reduce prices and share infrastructure. Slim's market share started declining. His wealth dropped from $75 billion to $50 billion in just 2 years. But here's what nobody expected. He didn't fight back. Instead, he did something far more strategic. While regulators were focused on breaking up his telecom empire, Carlos Slim was quietly building something bigger. He had never put all his eggs in one basket. Beyond telecommunications, the Slim family controlled Grupo Financiero Inbursa, one of Mexico's largest banking and insurance groups. Grupo Carso, a conglomerate of industrial manufacturing, retail, and infrastructure companies. Inmuebles Carso, one of Latin America's largest real estate development firms. Minera Frisco, mining operations producing gold, silver, and copper. Sixa, one of the largest construction companies in Latin America that has built highways, bridges, and entire cities, and hundreds of other companies ranging from department stores to oil drilling, from newspapers to restaurants. The telecommunications empire was just the tip of the iceberg. 2008, the American financial crisis. While Wall Street was collapsing, Carlos Slim saw his father's lesson playing out again. Blood in the streets. Time to buy. He invested hundreds of millions in the New York Times company, becoming the largest individual shareholder and literally saving America's paper of record from bankruptcy. He bought major stakes in Saks Fifth Avenue. He invested in luxury retailers across the United States. He was attempting to do in America what he had done in Mexico, buy assets during crisis and dominate. But something unexpected happened. The American establishment pushed back. Regulators blocked his attempts to acquire major telecom assets. Media criticized his monopolistic practices. Politicians questioned his influence. For the first time in his career, Carlos Slim encountered a market he couldn't conquer. The United States wouldn't let him play the same game. And it taught the Slim family a crucial lesson. Some empires have borders even $900 billion can't cross. Today, Carlos Slim Helú is 85 years old, and the empire is transitioning. His 6 children have been groomed for decades to take control. Carlos Slim Damat, the eldest son, chairs the boards of América Móvil, Carso, and Telmex. Patrick Slim handles the financial services division. Marco Antonio oversees the infrastructure and construction businesses. The daughters Salmia, Vanessa, and Johanna control the family's philanthropic foundations and cultural institutions. But here's what makes this succession different from most billionaire families. The Slims aren't just maintaining an empire. They're expanding it into new territories: artificial intelligence, green energy, biotechnology, financial technology. They're investing billions in the industries that will define the 21st century. The second generation isn't living off inherited wealth. They're building the next empire. So what's the secret? How did one family accumulate $900 billion in assets while staying relatively unknown to the world? The answer lies in Carlos Slim's philosophy, which he's repeated for decades but few have truly understood. Maintain austerity in good times to have resources in bad times. While other billionaires were buying sports teams and private islands, Slim was saving capital for the next crisis. Stay liquid. He keeps enormous amounts of cash available to move quickly when opportunities arise. Think long-term. Every acquisition is evaluated based on its potential over decades, not quarters. Vertical integration. Control the entire supply chain from production to distribution to retail. Never give competitors an opening. And perhaps most importantly, Stay invisible. The more attention you attract, the more enemies you make. Let people focus on Bezos and Musk and Zuckerberg. While they're fighting over headlines, quietly build an empire they don't even see. But there's a darker side to this story we can't ignore. Critics argue that Carlos Slim built his fortune not through innovation, but through monopolistic control. That he's extracted wealth from one of the world's poorest countries by charging artificially high prices for essential services. That income inequality in Mexico is partly sustained by concentrated wealth at the top. The OECD estimated that Slim's telecom monopoly cost the Mexican economy 1.8% of GDP annually, billions of dollars that could have gone to development, education, and infrastructure. Some economists call him the ultimate rent seeker, someone who makes money not by creating value, but by controlling access to necessary resources and charging tolls. Is Carlos Slim a brilliant businessman who created jobs and built infrastructure? Or is he a monopolist who enriched himself at the expense of an entire nation? The answer might be both. Today, the Slim empire spans 217 companies in 25 countries. The family's net worth fluctuates between $70 and $90 billion depending on market conditions, but their actual control represents assets worth over $900 billion. That's nearly the GDP of the entire nation of Mexico. In telecommunications alone, they serve more than 300 million subscribers across the Americas. Every day, millions of people wake up and pay money to Slim companies without even realizing it. The empire has outlasted recessions, regulatory challenges, political changes, and even the death of Carlos Slim's wife in 1999, which devastated him personally but didn't slow the business. It's an empire built to last centuries, not decades, and it's still growing. Carlos Slim once said, "Anyone who is not investing now is missing a tremendous opportunity." He was talking about the 2008 financial crisis, but the statement reveals everything about how he thinks. While others see danger, he sees opportunity. While others panic, he plans. While others consume, he accumulates. The Slim family built a $900 billion empire not through luck but through strategy, not through inheritance but through acquisition, not through flash but through focus. Love him or hate him, Carlos Slim Helú changed Latin America forever, and the empire he built will shape the continent for generations to come. The question is, will the next generation of Slims be remembered as builders or extractors, innovators or monopolists? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the most powerful family in Latin America isn't going anywhere. If anything, they're just getting started.